Welcome to another episode of Energy Bytes. I'm Bobby Nealon. I've got my trusty co-host, the Rad Dad, John Calfan here with us.
What's up, everybody?
And really excited. Want to introduce our guest today. We've got Catalina Herrera from Dataiku. She's the field CDO, and Nathan Semones are their account executive. And but both with a ton of experience in oil and gas and energy and tech. So I think a lot of good nuggets going to kind of come out of this. So
yeah, I'm excited. I know we've had to reschedule on both sides, so it's fun to finally get you guys in the studio. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, good to see you guys. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Of course. So yeah, I mean, usually we want to just kind of jump in and talk about what the journey looks like for different people to get into oil and gas or tech, and because the cool thing is everyone's story is different. It's pretty wild, and I think we'll see a pretty strong dichotomy even between the two of you, just based on what I know about you. But I mean, you start with Catalina. But I mean, how did you get in? I mean, was computers and stuff? Was that something even as a kid that you were really into, or kind of how'd you make that trek into energy or tech?
I didn't have an email until 95
okay.
or so. So no. And I come from Colombia, so it was a lot of cultural pressure of being a doctor or a lawyer.
Okay.
So I had those two options, clearly. And when I mentioned, and I never had a Barbie there. And the one Barbie that I had, and actually opened the back to see the engine that helped the arm going up and down. So I think that was a sign.
Yeah.
I am a lot into music and sound. Okay. So I told my mother I want to be a sound engineer. And she said, that's not going to pay your bills.
Yeah. What are you going to do with that? Right?
So that's not going to work. And she was a single mother at the time. So it was a very important decision. How are we going to spend that money, right?
Yeah.
So I started with, okay, I'm going to go for medicine. And then I realized that it was no fucking way. I was not going to sleep my 8 hours per night because I actually do like a very balanced life.
Sure.
Believe it or not. And that's when I heard about electronics.
Okay.
Engineer. So I did that in Colombia. And it was a very good experience, so that they offered me to be a professor at this university that I did my bachelor's. So I was teaching for the fourth time. This class on semiconductors, and I was teaching about silicon wafers. Okay. And I realized I am wasting my time. I mean, I do really need to complement my information and my knowledge, and we don't even produce these things in Colombia. So I need to get out of here.
Sure.
And that's how I started my journey. At that time, I already had a master's that was from Colombia in electronics and computer science. Okay. But then to get out into the United States, I kept my F1 student visa that allowed me to go into a campus in West Texas A&M University. And it was a cultural shock. So just FYI, Bogota, imagine. Colombia, 10 million people, cultural life, theater all over. Yeah. Canyon, Texas, dry town.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
You cannot find a beer without getting to Amarillo or 20 miles from. And that was very shocking.
I bet.
So I went through that journey, and with a 4.0 GPA, Texas Tech gave me a scholarship that was tied to Texas Instruments. So Texas Instruments has a deal alliance with Tech, and if you have some decent grades and perform, they sponsor your education. I was lucky enough to be part of that group.
Amazing.
That's awesome.
And then I actually was interviewed by Texas Instruments. They offered me an internship. I was in Houston.
Yeah.
And they gave me a computer, and guess what was installed on that computer? A Spotfire.
Nice.
Was installed in that computer. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know anything about it. And my job was a yield engineer.
Okay.
So my responsibility is, how are you going to look at all this data coming from all over the place with this computer and whatever is installed there, and give us insights into how we're going to optimize yield and reduce this cost of producing scrappy things that are not going to work. And that's how I discovered the power of data. Okay. So that was an aha moment. Spotfire became
like
my third arm.
Yeah.
My third and fourth eye. Like, wow, right?
Yeah.
So that was a very important moment, I would say, in my career.
Oh, for sure. No, I always say that was my gateway drug as well. So
Yeah, like, wow. So I'm connecting the dots as well. Like, oh, if I produce this visualization, that represents how many millions? Like, what? So that was a very important moment. And then after that, I started consulting. So TIPCO offered me a position, and I started in the analytics consulting business, pretty much driving the seat. So now I was driving the seat with the Spotfire, very into, hey, what's going on, what's new, how we can maximize the value that we are providing, and how we can maximize the opportunity here, because now I understand what it means. So I'm happy to share it.
Sure.
And then life happens. So life happens, is technology evolves.
Yeah.
We learn, we continue learning. And as a consultant, I like driving the seat, meaning I like state-of-the-art technology. Therefore, I am with Dataiku right now. That Beautiful. I believe is leading the market into what we can do to really maximize what's out of data. So that's a little bit of my story.
No, it's awesome. A lot to unpack, I think, across that, but definitely want to, see where Nathan.
Yeah, my journey is circuitous as well. You get to decide who's gone through more turns, but
no, I think this is our first with 2, so this will be fun.
We had them in.
We had
pod 2.
Yeah. Navigating 2 guests is definitely different than just one, but
well, I'll try and keep it interesting. So my dad worked in IT and oil and gas his whole career, and so I had no desire to do either of those things.
It's funny how many people you talk to. It's like, oh, my parents were in oil and gas, and I said I would never do it, and here I am.
I don't think I was even against it. I just was off doing other things. So I was a radio TV film major. I wanted to be a sports reporter. We were just talking earlier about how my last semester in college, I got to intern for Madison Square Garden, which was awesome. But even then, that was sort of like this crest of technology change. I was uploading podcasts that were like the interviews with the coaches, the, sort of game debriefs. So, spring of 2005 was uploading podcasts into, a website so that nobody could download them. But it was, RSS feeds and things like that. So, but came from a world where I was going to do a lot more of this as it related to sports. So as I continued that path, I realized that almost anybody in a sports career, if you're not going to do the journalism side, has master degrees. So I went and did a double master's at UCF in Orlando, and that included my MBA, but also a master's in sports business, because I wanted to pursue, the professor that I studied under there used to be the VP of marketing for the NBA.
Okay.
And so what I found really interesting about the sports world was the sponsorship side of the business, because you have to create these win-win-win between the fans, the community, this owner, the stadium, and then all of the potential sponsors that are forking over a lot of money, but need to see the eyeballs and the value and the ROI returned. That's right. And so I was really passionate about pursuing that, and then finished my grad school in the 08-09 downturn. And so got sort of tied into the technology world. I did grow up with technology. I think I'm in the narrow slice that's the Oregon Trail generation. And
buddy.
So as technology evolved, I kept jumping on to the next iteration.
Would you say you kept fording the river?
I did. I forded the river and only lost a few people along the way. So
no cholera.
Dysentery, etc.
I'll sit here and make
so, but it's been a very interesting journey. And so then as I got into technology, I started off, in recruiting, and then got into hardware, and then got into software, and then got into analytics. And the thread there is that I kept finding it more and more compelling to get closer to the business problem.
Sure.
Because it seemed more interesting and challenging and complex and more difficult to solve. I mean, some of the stuff that's easier to solve, more commodity oriented, it's a race to the bottom. And I just found this space so interesting and compelling. And so I was drawn to it. And so Catalina and I had the pleasure to work together back at TIPCO. And so I sold Spotfire for several years and then joined Dataiku 2.5 years ago. And the first thing I did when I signed my offer letter was hire Catalina.
Yeah.
So we were glad to reunite. And so now I lead our energy vertical for basically for the US, and then have a lot of influence on where the product goes in terms of what we do for our energy customers, because Dataiku is horizontal. So we cover every industry. We're I think they actually finally made this public. So we're up in 6 figures in revenue and 250 million in revenue. So we're growing quickly, and we've hired over half the company since I came to work here 2.5 years ago. So
That's
it's
awesome.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's fun getting into a startup when they're hitting that growth mode, because it's just so different from when you started, and you're like, how the hell did this happen?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it happens so fast too.
Well, and when it's been a challenging time in tech, more broadly.
No,
So,
very
100%.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have the double whammy of tech and oil and gas. It's always one or the other, right?
That's right. It seems like I can, and actually that was a big part of it. So I think, I had my eye towards what is a compelling technology for oil and gas, but also that I can, in an oil and gas downturn, weather that while I see the rest of our company do well. And so there's going to be cycles like this that are, challenging for the broader macro, that oil and gas is doing relatively well. And then that might flip at some point, but to be with a company that can weather that either direction.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
no, I think that's a big pro of being in the energy tech space. That's more tech than just energy, right?
Absolutely.
It's like, that was at HiveCell, that was a appeal to me. Yes, I was in similar situation leading the vertical, but as a company, at least it wasn't all time. I started at HiveCell the year after we hit negative oil price.
Right.
And so I was like, listen, just a year ago, this is what the situation was. So like, don't expect people to come knocking down the door for this brand new thing and this new concept that we just convinced the industry to move to the cloud. And now I'm coming in to tell them to move back on prem. Right. Like, and so it's always nice to be able to see that, like, people who really are passionate for the industry get into positions where it's not always tied to oil price, right?
Yeah,
that's right.
That can be brutal at times.
Yeah, and I'll probably obviously to agree, TIBCO isn't or wasn't, but they do a big part of their market share is energy, especially oil and gas,
particularly on the Spotfire side, for sure. And obviously, TIBCO is used across lots of different verticals as well, but they have a massive suite of products, and that's a different story than what we're doing, where there's one product, and so we're serving lots of different industries with one piece of software.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that also makes it a lot easier to communicate with your customers about.
Absolutely.
Right? Instead of having to try and tell someone about that is a Spotfire user about Stream or Streambase or whatever it was called. And
that's right.
Convincing them that it's worth the money versus
it's a more cohesive story.
It's
and we're both very happy to be here because it is a clean story to tell.
Yeah. So and you can tell me if there's a better way to go about this, but I'm thinking maybe we start from like, what is Dataiku and like why and whatever, and then maybe from there work backwards towards other tools and stuff that you've seen do the job and that you've seen or used throughout your career, and like, what it solves, and then but what were some of the pain points that happened before that it solves.
I think I can just start with kind of what we saw all the time in Spotfire land. And so in that world, we saw lots of really complex and cool things that people built, but all of that logic got trapped into a dashboard or even an app that somebody built, and that became super powerful for that use case, but then not very accessible to other folks.
Sure.
And then when you do that at scale in an organization, it gets really messy to manage. I think every single one of my customers was like, why is there not more around version control? Why is there, I think
they finally are.
Did they?
In the library, I think.
Okay.
Either the last one or definitely this new one, they finally have like a form of version control in the library.
Yeah. But that's the kind of thing that happened for so many years that it was a frustration from customers. So like we would see these sort of complex environments because it was such a beloved tool, but that it enabled this self-service paradigm without as many guardrails as it should have. It created a little bit of chaos, or a lot of chaos.
Well, and this is, I think, this is a good topic because there's the whole idea of the institutional knowledge, but then also like it's also one of these like cautionary stories on how restrictive or how loose IT organizations are. Because I've heard, and I've been there. I was at Conoco, which I think they had a pretty good balance. Honestly, I had pretty good accessibility to what I needed, but like I've heard people like, all I had access to was Spotfire, so then I'm writing SQL in information links to do this. Yep. Whereas like probably better off pushing that upstream to the warehouse or some other side of it. But then you have people that are too laissez-faire and like, everyone's got their own copy and it might as well be an Excel sheet with, Jimmy version 2.5 date, whatever. But again, like I'm big on institutionalizing like knowledge and like, again, like all that business logic gets trapped inside of a BI tool. I mean, Spotfire is one of a handful that is an issue, whether it's Tableau, Power BI, whatever. I mean, there's really, or Excel, like really important business logic that is trapped there. And again, sometimes only that person knows how to use it. Again, you see it all the time in oil and gas. Companies move people between assets. So, again, let's talk Alex Lack, it was on our thing. Guy built some really cool stuff for us in, Conoco Bakken. Well, he went to Oxy. I probably died on the vine. There was things that I left behind when I left Conoco. I'd like to think that he kept being used, but I don't know.
That's right.
So
I think it's a mandatory journey. All right. And like it's been 20 years of learning, of digitalizing more data, of putting more use cases into a data pipeline, understanding what we can do from the descriptive to predictive and what it means and all of that. It's been a journey, but I think we proved the point, like predictive can be very valuable.
Yeah.
So now how do let's go back, like, okay, let's zoom out for a second. Now we know that works. How do we optimize this thing? And how do we really make it better? And what it means is that not only the logic is trapped there is also a lot of change into the infrastructure itself.
Yeah.
There is also a lot of change into the teams themselves because they are leaving and changing jobs. And this guy
downturns and layoffs and
didn't document anything and let's start over and yada yada yada. It's the same old. So I think it's like, okay, so what's different?
Sure.
And that's the thing. Okay, what's different? Well, technology will continue to change. That infrastructure will continue to change. People will continue to change.
Yeah.
Predictive is valuable. So what's different? Let's orchestrate it in a way that we can leverage the team that we have and that we can keep scaling.
Sure.
And by the way, keep learning.
Right.
So that's what's new. That's what's different. That we learn the lesson.
Yeah, and that's what drew me here was when seeing those challenges at customers, particularly the largest ones. Because as it scales, it becomes so problematic that abstracting all of that logic and orchestrating and automating and making all of that something that's sustainable, that the next user can come in from a different team or from another organization and launch off quickly without having to go rebuild stuff themselves. And so it becomes a very virtuous paradigm to work in, and it enables so much more for people who don't have a coding background or don't have those sort of skill sets, and it upskills you as you do it so that you have access to those things even if you don't come from the coding world.
Yeah, so let's talk about that because obviously I come from the coding world. John's kind of definitely a hybrid, but
definitely not a coder.
But you do write some code.
I let the language models write my code these days for the most part.
So say someone who's used to writing custom expressions or calculated columns in Spotfire, like how does like some Dataiku meet them in the middle? Is there a kind of graphical interface to it, or is there a query language around it that is easy to pick up? Or just curious.
Yeah, both. And the beauty of it is that you take it out of the box. So you not only solve the problem, however you know how to solve the problem. So use your skills and solve it, but that creates a piece that tech communicates with his piece, my piece, his piece, regardless of you code, you don't, you code, you don't.
Yeah.
And that is where the difference is.
Okay, that's huge.
It is huge. And then you can automate those pieces.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so think about accelerating time to value.
Yeah, 100%.
So it is a GUI. It's a canvas that you read like a book. But at any one of those steps along the way, any of those nodes in the workflow, you can just drop in your own code. And so it's Python or SQL or R, whatever you have that's bring your own. But it also enables somebody who doesn't want to write a SQL code. I mean, that might be a coder that doesn't want to write a SQL query, right?
Yeah.
But allows you to do those sort of transformations visually so that you don't necessarily need to code them.
Got it. Okay. So, I mean, I'm just trying to think about, and I think I've talked to you about this too, but like, I think there's any number of companies that you either compete with, but also don't compete with. I mean, like, and then we were talking about that even just Microsoft in general, competes with Databricks, but they're also a huge partner, whatever. But because I mean, I'm hearing it sounds a little bit like a Matillion or a SSIS, but then like almost like I almost would think of you guys almost competing with Databricks. I mean, certain things. So I'm just trying to think where you fit in like kind of that puzzle. I mean, like I guess it could be any number of pieces of the process, whether it's data engineering, data analysts, data science. So
yeah, I can take a stab at that. I'm sure Catalina has some opinions as well. So we were the partner of the year for Snowflake for the third year in a row from an AI ML perspective. This was our first year as partner of the year for Databricks. And so that might set off a whole bunch of other conversations, but the place where we sit as an orchestrator on top of those things means we don't really care where the data is. And then we make it accessible wherever you want to. So via API or into your dashboarding tool of choice. We aren't going to move data. We're just going to push down compute into whatever engine you guys bring to the table, any organization. So we run on all three clouds or on-prem.
Okay.
So it really is take advantage of your existing tech investments, and lots of people like that because that means they don't need to move.
Yeah.
But think of us more as like the last mile ETL, right? I mean, so often it's just T. It's not the E and the L.
Sure, yeah.
It's just take what you've got today and transform it into something that drives analytic and insight-driven decisions.
Okay.
So if I've just for clarity,
yeah.
So I've got my Snowflake or SQL or combination of whatever data stack on the back end. Y'all kind of plug in on top of that, so I can then do whether it be ETL or AI, etc., and then all the way through to production deployment of that and management, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will add a couple of things. First, the cycle, when we say end to end, right? So it's connect to a bunch of stuff, put the data in a way that it can be consumed, and then feed different data outcomes. And when it's dashboards or UX that is giving you a machine learning model or whatever else is happening. So the fact that you can actually orchestrate this, keeping the agnostic,
right,
whatever infrastructure, that's number one. Number two, adding better compute when you have it. That's a huge one, especially with generative AI coming.
Yeah.
Right? So how much are you going to pay for those tokens in the LLM versus do you really need it? Or, those decisions, where are you going to run that compute? Do you need a GPU? Do you need a vector database? Do you actually need it? It's like those things need to be part of it. But then at the same time, it's like all the ecosystem, when you mentioned, we have a lot of software out there that does pieces of it.
Sure.
So we connect to it in this way and we produce this thing. Spotfire was very good at that. But what happens after was a huge missing component there. How do I deploy this project into production? Can I do this with 3 clicks of a mouse? Wow.
Yeah.
Is this being deployed to all my teams with 3 clicks? That is different, right?
Sure.
How is this being consumed by somebody else and UX? And now we talk about generative AI and the LLMs and the ChatGPTs of the company, no? So how do we put this in a private tenant so nobody else sees our documents?
Yeah, we can feed our stuff.
We can use the technology that is out there. So it's a huge framework and it has many pieces of it. And that's where you fit the ecosystem. Oh, yeah, we have the Spotfire, Tableaus, Quicks, all of that. What is that? But analysis, visualization, ETL, dashboarding. Yes, you can play with Python here, play with R here, but at the end, that goes nowhere because you are not deploying that into any production, anything.
No, 100%.
Right? That's the main component right there.
Is the visualization in the platform or to whatever visualization tool you Okay, beautiful.
But
that's exactly what I was going to say. So, I mean, that's a big component of it too,
and
right?
that's
like
a huge one, the UX.
Big problem with Spotfire for a lot of people is it's like, I, as the engineer, know how to use Spotfire because I use it every day. But the finance accounting person whose dashboard I'm trying to build has no clue what that is or how to use it. And because it's built on this stack, it's now stuck in this box, right? Yes. And like getting it out of that box into something else that the end user is used to or comfortable with becomes a lot harder. So I love the fact that you guys are nice, neutral third party, just moving and
pieces
and transforming.
But, and I will say an important part of it is the UX and the how user friendly it is, because we do think in different ways. I mean, I have my two brains pretty balanced, and I like to think, and I DJ and I paint and all of that, and I am very creative as well. But you think differently, you have different skills. But then the so what and the different skills, UX super easy baby steps, literally. They're embedded. All those engines are already embedded. Like, hey, I need to do geocoding or extract this from latitude, longitude. All of this is one click away. So it's like, okay, this is a no-brainer. Even for a coder. Like, oh, I already have my Jupyter notebook. I have my machine learning perfect, very precise model. And now I have the opportunity to compare that and add 15 others.
Sure.
And compare all those metrics in a minute. Like, wow, okay, why not? Yeah. So it's not only connecting dots, it's also empowering SMEs to go beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an important part. We were talking about it just a minute ago. And, you know, internally here, we're looking at deploying some different language models and stuff to be able to use internally. And I was talking to Nathan and I was like, you know, my problem is I don't know which one. I don't know how each of the open source ones are going, what output they're going to generate for my use case. And the idea of standing up, you know, 6 of those on my own server and then running through them all through the same tests is very daunting to someone like myself who is familiar with code and generally understands it. But from an architecture and backend side, it's like, ugh. But being able, I mean, I'm probably going to be talking to y'all about trying to see how we can do some of that on your platform. But I think that's a big thing, especially kind of looking forward, is we all know everyone in the industry is excited about AI, but none of them are going to use any of the paid services because it's all proprietary information and they don't want someone, you know, using their data. So that means everyone's going to stand up their own language models internally somehow, some way. And then it's like, okay, well, which one do you use? Okay, well, how do we test that? And it's like being able to quickly deploy and test all of those things is not a menial task by any means. And so having software out there that's designed to kind of do that sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah. Think about it as a funnel. So the base of the funnel, you may have 10, 15 of those LLMs. You have the llamas, the GPTs, the whatever, dollies. But then at the end, you want to democratize that. And you want to just provide a ChatGPT UX to somebody to ask questions about their PDFs and enhance that. Done. That's a very simple use case. But right now, key component is, hey, how much is that going to cost me with this LLM versus how much is going to cost me with that LLM? And do I need to have a private tenant for that and do a RAG project instead of a simple query?
Yeah. But I mean, again, you say simple, and it kind of brings up one of my favorite sayings is simple but not easy, right? I mean, like, and I think this is a good segue into like talking about different skill sets and like just whether it's DevOps, but now specifically MLOps, like the skill set of a data scientist or a machine learning engineer is totally different than someone who needs to actually operationalize that. But it sounds like your platform maybe enables now a data scientist or machine learning engineer to actually build a model and then operationalize it, so where they don't need someone with that specialized skill set of how do I write an API around this model, and then I have to host that API in a container and I have to send inputs and get it out. Whereas it sounds like on your platform, like they can create it, you create the API endpoints for that model. And
with a super friendly click here and put on. And it's that glue that allows these projects to go faster.
I think, you know, what is a great customer quote, because it's a little bit confusing and it makes you think about it, is that we're both the lubricant and the glue. So we make everything go faster, but we hold it all together. And that becomes like, you think about just the process that you described, which is we built a really awesome model, but now we've got to go refactor it and code it and deploy it into production. And did we miss our business opportunity because it took us 6 to 12 months to actually get that thing deployed? And like that,
for sure,
that happens at a lot of organizations.
Well, I mean, I think if you were working on a model back in, November, October of last year, and then all of a sudden ChatGPT comes out 2 months later, even I
think that's a big piece of this is the rate at which things are moving is just so, especially on the AI side, is so crazy that like one of the risks of like from my perspective as a user of trying to pick which one is what if I pick and build on the one that doesn't succeed? Well, then I'm gonna have to go redo all of this stuff. So having platforms where it's like, hey, I can just remove that one and plug this one in, or try all of them and see which one comes up with the best results without having to go stand every single one up by myself and then write all the APIs for them because that's how I want to use the models is it's pretty slick.
That's right. Or compare something that you've already coded to like, okay, here's a whole bunch of AutoML things. And then, let me hop into each of those explainability and what if analyses so that I can see, okay, well, actually the one we coded is better, or this one's interesting and that surprises me.
Yeah. And I think we can kind of break into this. I was talking this morning with, I'll say his name. He won't mind, Jeff Hughes. And he was asking me, basically why, and this isn't necessarily y'all, but I think your stuff enables similar capabilities. Like why a data lakehouse? It sounds just really, buzzwordy, and it is. And just the name of it, there's some shock value to it. But I mean, I was trying to explain to him, like, say in a traditional data science workflow, the way it used to be, like, if you had just SQL Server, like all your data was there, great, it's organized. Well, the data scientist still needs to go pull that in and then load it into memory in R or Python, and then do some pandas and this and that. Or they have to download a CSV of it and then do all these massaging steps to get it where they want it. And then they got to train the model. And then, all right, now the model's good. Well, now we need to go actually apply these steps that I applied in my R script, recreate those as a data engineering workflow. Then it runs through the model. But how do I even feed that data into the model? I have to host now it would be containers. Even before that, you had to set up some kind of VM or whatever that was hosting it, and you'd feed them in there. And then how do you get it out of there? Does it go back into SQL Server, or where does it end up? But now you've got, platforms like yours where it's like, it's working on top of your data. The pre-processing work you did is now, already done. Like you worked on that to get it into there, and you're working. I'm assuming you have like notebooks within there, so you don't have to pull it out into your IDE. Like it's all one cohesive thing.
Sync with your IDE.
Yeah, and then the outputs of that go through, and those are still accessible. So now you have this whole data governance side of it, where again, your data engineers, your data scientists, your data analysts are all using the same data. You're not moving data around. It's again more secure in that way because the data stays in that data platform, and it's just easier to share those results, with everyone. And now your SQL analysts are able to write SQL against the data that was the output of the model. There's so much less cognitive, overhead even that you have to deal with. So, just kind of get y'all's thoughts on that.
That's part of it. So the beauty of it is I'm back to my framework because it's my favorite word for data representation, because it allows that loop. And if you want to push it back to your new, better compute initiative, because that goes on all the time. It's like, oh yeah, we're going to invest on this new one. But this one is going to move to that one. And then that other one comes from a third party that is this one. So that's always going to be part of it. So the fact that you can orchestrate it, but within a dev sandbox environment, design, experiment, confirm with your SME, check out that this thing is actually working. Tie that up with the initiative from the use case perspective, stakeholders. Who cares if this model drifts? Who do I notify? Why? Like that holistic view. So zoom out, and it's like, okay, who's going to be using how? And then, and that framework is what really accelerates the time to value. So agnosticism is key, but also being able to connect these personas and allow a feedback to where you need the data today or tomorrow. That is a huge component of it.
So that triggered a few more things for me then too. I mean, so in Dataiku, you can send alerts to people based off certain. So I mean, like, so again, an alerting system is not trivial to set up,
no.
to do in house.
Even the out of the box ones are still. I mean,
but even then too, I mean, like, so, and we just got, Airflow set up in house. And like, what nice thing about there is like running your Python scripts, like the print statements become part of the log. Well, but like, say before, if you can certainly, when we're doing it, run Python scripts as a scheduled task, but like, then it takes more effort to write a log out of that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of overhead. So now when you can abstract that and just like, all right, my print statements become part of the log, and now that's there. So, I mean, I'm assuming, again, it sounds like you have the alerting capability, which is not a trivial thing to do for most people. And then I'm assuming, obviously, you have some auditability and logging with everything that happens.
And that's a huge component of it. That somebody can automate. What's going on after 20 years of doing ETL in a Spotfire? It's running out of guys. Yeah. Like, load all those information links that we have at Conoco. I'm sure you. Yeah. I don't know if you ever saw my downhole dashboard over there. It was famous. But what was going on behind the scenes? Information links. Mm-hmm. So what happens when you have 50 of those, and then it starts like
more and more, it starts crawling, and it's
right. So how are you gonna change that? How are you gonna optimize that? Mm-hmm. How are you gonna put gas into it? So remove that friction and allow the normal Excel users to automate.
Sure.
So every day, what do I have to do? Connect to these 15 sources, create this one table, and plot this one graph.
Yeah.
Do it for me every time. 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning. When I woke up, the table is populated, it's clean. The analysis is there. If something drifted, somebody was notified.
Yeah.
If that somebody was notified with a production, very important use case, a data scientist was notified and is already looking at the drift, and is already retraining a model, and is already redeploying a model.
Yeah.
And somebody can sign off, this is aligned with our policies, and this is aligned with what we think internally, because that's the other thing that we haven't talked about. But this is also something that we have been learning, which is, not only we're generating data outcomes, but we have to generate data outcomes that are responsible.
Sure.
And that we understand what the heck is going on there.
Right.
And if something is wrong, we can track it back or fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's initially 5-10 years ago when people started talking about AI in the oil field. That was the big problem, right? Is you're presenting to a room full of engineers who I'm a mechanical engineer because I have to know how things work. I take shit apart and I put it back together. I might break it 3 times until I finally figure it out, but I will do it. And so you're sitting in a room trying to pitch this black box that you can't explain to them, and they have no idea, and they're already not trusting of you because you're tech and you're a big scary thing. But it's like, being able to have even just auditability of like, not even just with an AI model, but over time within a company, right? Like Bobby left and so took over, and that's where this piece of code changed, which is when all the issues started. Exactly. And so now we know where to start debugging instead of here's the file. Exactly. And you're like, well, shit, I haven't, you just start going through it.
Yeah.
So that kind of triggered another thing for me. Like, so what about like data, like a data dictionary, but like maybe even Lineage, like, I mean, discoverability. I mean, like people like, I want to find this, like, I mean, does your platform help enable that too? Like you can find where that data is or where it started, how it got to where it is.
Yes. And think about it as a Lego of building blocks.
Yeah.
So sometimes to find that data can be on a structure or semi-structure or whatever. You may need to still do some OCR, some processing, and some basic NLP. But at the end, you are going to be tagging or highlighting or grouping worldwide. I mean, yes, you can use all kinds of NLP to surface what you need to surface. But the beauty of it is that you already found a use case. You can copy paste and change the unstructured data and serve it to somebody else, and then copy paste and serve it to this other team that cares about these marketing insights.
Sure.
And these ones care about human resources. So they're looking at different PDFs, but at the end they're asking the question that they want to ask. Right. And that's how you scale.
Are you seeing?
I was just going to jump off that point. There's cataloging. So like everything that you've linked to in Dataiku is like, then it's surfaced to people who have permissions to see all those things. And so they can see what's being used and how often it's being used. And then there's, not just the what have you connected to catalog, but there's the feature store. So these are the things that we've worked on and blessed. And that's a data set that we should use more broadly in the organization. Okay. And it's used in all these different subset pipelines.
So you can have almost like, maybe it gets used too much, like a medallion architecture or something, like where like this is like the gold layer or the platinum layer, and like the this other stuff is more kind of in flux.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then you use that to feed what ultimately data engineers want to work on, things that become used. And so what ends up happening is there's, lots of analysts and subject matter experts who do things, and we want to encourage that work. And as they do things, then data engineers say, well, I need to build that as a robust pipeline. And yeah, you do, but like, let's let more people drive that and have it democratize in terms of what the key things are. Yeah,
because that analyst at the edge knows what the business needs, and he can enable them to do some of that. But then again, it's still done in a more robust or
scalable manner. Just having, I think, historically speaking, one of the biggest issues the industry has always had is this silos, right? And it's like, they're on the same floor, but they don't even talk to each other, right? Like the completion engineers and the reservoir engineers are literally on the same floor in the same building in the same city, and one is saying one thing and the other is saying something different, and I, as a service provider, have no idea who to listen to or what to trust or whatever. But thinking about it from the flip side is internally, right? The problem, historically speaking, has been we've got all this data, but it's in different places, or it's locked down by IT in this one little thing. And as an engineer, I'm going to find a way to get the data regardless of whether IT locks it down. So now I found an AI bot that's going in and just downloading CSVs for me once a day so that I don't have to do that. When in reality, if it just had a platform that had permissions, I could have access directly to the data sets that I need to have access to without interrupting any of that security piece. And it can all be built off of the same handfuls of mother data, so to speak, that we know is good, and then anybody can use it, right? And so that's
I want to add a piece there because you just touched on a very important point. I worked around IT.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
that's happening a lot.
Yeah,
because you have all of these frustrated people that is trying to actually make a simple decision, and all they need to do is have visibility. So it's as simple as that. But what I am also seeing is how culturally IT is starting to change. As in, okay, I'm not going to be the bottleneck. How I'm going to govern this, how I'm going to give you your data catalog or your future store or your group, go and have fun with those dashboards. I don't care, but I'm going to orchestrate it for you. So I think that's where the real value comes today, as in what skills need to change with this technology. Is like, we have to be the humans empowered by the technology and keep bringing the unique humanness that we can bring to this table that is not replaceable by
even
technology.
Just doing it on top of the data too, right? It's not from or in the warehouse or directly from it. And I feel like that's the thing. We a lot of us, me personally, talk a lot of shit about IT departments a lot of the time, but a lot of them, their main goal or function is to keep the company secure, because their data is one of their biggest assets, right? And so it's not because I don't like the IT folks. It's just there's conflicting incentives, right? Like, engineer, solve the problem. IT guy, lock everything down. So
it's designed friction.
Right, exactly. And so being able to have something like this where it's like, hey, you can have access to this, and even if you do screw it up, it's not going to affect the actual database, right?
Well, there's that too. But I mean, and I was wanting to maybe segue into some of the cybersecurity kind of side of it, because I mean, I'm lucky right now. I'm at a private company. We don't have to worry about SOC compliance and all that stuff as much. But I mean, I'm sure I have to imagine your platform is SOC compliant. But also, I mean, just again, by keeping everything in the platform, be able to send things within, I think a huge data security risk is like people just emailing around Excel files and CSVs. I mean, like that in and of itself, just like sending around crucial information like that way, it's not, it's just not efficient at all. But like, there's the chance that it gets sent to the wrong person or someone outside the organization. Like,
seen that happen many times. Hit reply all instead of reply, and then the client gets the data that they're not supposed to, or somebody else's.
Or I mean, God forbid, like competitor. Because it's like, say you had a data sharing agreement, but you send
well, even then, like the easiest. I mean, in my very limited knowledge on the cybersecurity side, one of the easiest ways people get hacked is through phishing, which means they get access to your email first. And so, if you've got all this proprietary data in emails, because that's how you're sending them around, not the most secure way to do it, right?
Yeah. And that is going to be even more important with generative AI and LLMs. And how are you going to handle the toxic, like what kind of guardrails do you have to put there
in
terms of private data and all of that? What kind of searches are allowed? Give me the list of social security. So like, can you do that? Right. What is the guardrail on those queries and all of that? And that's part of the experimentation that needs to happen before thinking about deploying to production an LLM use case as well.
Yeah. No, definitely.
I think when you think about several of the things that we've kind of touched on in the last little bit here, it's the challenges that exist with traditional desktop-oriented tools where you end up sharing information inefficiently and maybe insecurely.
Yeah.
The challenges with handoff points in data processes that ultimately create delays and potentially missed opportunities or just delayed value. Mm-hmm. And then when you think about how many groups are used to working alone in their discipline or maybe in their asset team, but not as aware or keen to what another group within their organization is doing, there's missed opportunities from that standpoint. And so really why we're so passionate about being here is because the browser-based interface to collaborate across teams, across functions, and in a paradigm that is both self-service to like enable anybody of any sort of background, persona, discipline to do their data-driven work, and then give IT the comfort to know all the governance, security, policy, everything is all tied in with the backend. So I know just in my decade of selling analytics and software to oil and gas, like security and architecture is just like the biggest way to just get stuck with the technology department because they have extreme concern, just to your point. I have never seen a software cleared as fast as Dataiku from IT security and architecture. They do deep dives and they're like, you guys already do everything the way that we would. Mm-hmm. And we work with the largest companies in the world. Yeah. And so something I've struggled with in prior lives is when you're working up the stack, working towards larger and larger companies, it's hard for companies to scale your technology from a security and architecture point to really serve the big boys. And Dataiku, luckily, has half of the Fortune 10. So we're working down market and bringing that to bear across more operators, more service companies. Yeah. And that's what's really exciting is that a scaling software like this is most compelling to the largest companies, and more companies are starting to take advantage of it.
Beautiful.
Yeah, no, being able to come into an office and say, well, we're working for whoever, right? Top Forbes 100 company is a very easy way to break the ice with a lot of IT and cybersecurity folks.
That's right, because we've been through the paces with the biggest ones. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, those are obviously all public companies, and they have to go through the rigor that that requires. And another thing I want to kind of hit on, and I just want to see if it's possible or what you do with it. What about like say streaming data and or like IoT? Do y'all have any kind of your fingers in those spaces at all, or?
Yeah, I mean, we consume Kafka.
Okay.
And we can do whatever we want with Kafka.
Sure.
So, but a majority of streaming use cases in real life end up being batch scoring.
Yeah.
Realistically.
Yeah, it's, we always talk about it as like, what does real time mean to you?
Exactly. So
everyone gives a different answer.
Is yes. And it means different things for different people. But again, we orchestrate what needs to happen on top of it.
Yeah, so we don't have people usually putting Dataiku out on the edge. But what you do is once you've got that data pulled back to something, then you'll build a model off of all that historical data, and then you'll deploy it maybe at the edge if it makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so you can obviously develop that model, in Dataiku, and then how easy is it then, say, to like generate, say, a container of that out of it? I mean, like, is that something that's baked in relatively, or what does that process look like?
Yeah, that's one of the huge advantages is that it makes life easier, and it becomes a template or a configuration here and there, and then it empowers people to get faster and get things done. So it's a simple UX.
Okay.
Clicking a couple of buttons. Yeah.
So that leads me to the question I've been waiting to ask the whole time, which is federated learning. how it sounds like y'all have, I mean, just where you sit and the way that you can do things is like, it's a perfect kind of platform for that. And for those who don't know what federated learning is, it's this idea that you build one model, then you deploy that model to many different locations, and then those are their own models running on those locations. They take their learnings, push them back to the mother model, it gets retrained on that, and then pushes that back down to its children models, and it's just this continuous loop. But it's literally what OpenAI has been doing for the last year. You go and you sign into GPT and you do it, and it takes the learnings or whatever that you taught it essentially there, and it pushes it back up to the main model, and now we have GPT-4 Turbo, right? Like, how does Dataiku handle that? And it sounds like it's kind of set up very nicely for federated learning as well. Is that
we
accurate?
Actually presented, that was the use case that we presented at the Hubs on MLOps in Houston.
Yeah.
When was that? Like a year ago?
Yeah.
So exactly that. And how it branches out, do your thing, and come back. Why? Because we can literally copy and paste blocks.
Yeah.
So yes, it's a lot of flexibility.
That's very cool. So what are some kind of just, let's call them wins. What are some wins that you guys have seen, different clients have, whether it's in oil and gas or outside of it, just using the platform? Some of the big kind of hurdles that they've overcome or ROIs that they've been able to achieve.
Go for it.
And then you complement everything. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things because we mentioned Snowflake, we mentioned Databricks. One of my customers right now, the aha moment happened when the accounting department was able to use the Databricks. Like that simple thing allowed them to use that data and automate a report. Like, it can be simpler than that.
Yeah.
But that is an aha moment. So what's going on is that we are actually gluing the opportunity to maximize the investments that are happening in terms of that technology, and connecting the dots for people with zero code background to be able to leverage that. So use cases as simple as that. But now more advanced enterprise companies that have been doing this for years, let's say in oil and gas, what's going on right now, the aha moment is MLOps, and really have a governance framework where you can keep an eye on that AI portfolio, because AI portfolio is going to be pieces of things that can be a data outcome again. It doesn't need to be machine learning for AI, for be part of that portfolio that you need to have an eye on. So that is opening doors for teams to collaborate and work together. And use cases now, classic use cases like the predictive maintenance that we have been talking for the last 20 years or so. Now, what is going on with that predictive maintenance? Because it's deployed in the field. It's in an automation routine where drift happens and the proper people gets notified and all of that. But at the same time, it's connected to a business unit that is also working 3 more projects. And now everything is part of this framework. So I know teams, I know who is doing that, what, and I know I have visibility on it. And then the cherry on top is the acceleration that LLMs are bringing to the table when you grab the classic predictive maintenance and now you add generative AI on it, and you just ask the thing, hey, show me the equipment that are in high priority of failure and give me the locations of it. Boom.
Yeah.
Right? So those are aha moments. And the fact that you can do that in a matter of weeks instead of months, and still reuse what your teams have been working for the last 10 years or so, those are the aha moments. It's like, okay, finally these pieces are actually being orchestrated.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that made me think of something that I thought of earlier and then immediately forgot because ADD. But so could I also theoretically use your platform to distribute information to people external of my company as well? I'm thinking of like my background coming from the frac side. The problem with frac analytics and AI ML is that half a dozen to a dozen different companies generate all of the data in different timestamps on their own systems, essentially. And of course, it's all the operator's data, but it all lives on their side until the operator gets it. And there's no really good way, central repository, so to speak, for all of that to kind of come together. Colbor's trying to do that. Corva's kind of pseudo doing that. But being able to have all of that data, like all the service companies push it to the operator's instance and Dataiku, and the Dataiku says, hey, kind of like a pseudo Kafka, you get this piece of the stream because that's the data that you need for your job, and you get this one over here, but you don't get, the other stuff from the other vendors and stuff like that. Is that a feasible?
Conceivably, you could do that. Yeah, for sure. And so that, like, because of the data cleaning capabilities in Dataiku, then you could set up those, as you receive those into files or databases or however you want that to, then you run those transformations and you stitch that together, and then you let the people listen to those automated outputs that come. And so because some of the alerting and things that we were talking about is Dataiku can trigger actions on new data or schedule or whatever you want it to be, and then as a result of that trigger, do the alert and action and whatever. So that, again, that orchestration means that there's no easy button for it. You do have to set it up, but then it makes it accessible to the people that need it in the organization.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. One thing I was curious about, so like, people have their Snowflake or the Databricks, but also maybe running Dataiku on AWS or Azure or internally. Like, does it have like its own Python engine within it, or does it have its own like R engine? Because you're saying I can plop in a Python script or an R script or whatever. Like, does it come with one, or do you have to install? Like, how does it handle like where that runs? Because I didn't know, say with Python, say Snowflake has their Snowpark, and then obviously you can run Python on Databricks, and that compiles down to like some Spark code. Like, so does Dataiku compile those things down to those engines, or if it's just a generic Python script, where does that run? Just kind of curious on
the
that.
engines. So we leverage Snowpark in Snowflake, and that's a big aha moment as well.
Yeah,
because you are connecting a lot of dots there. So yes, we leverage the infrastructure.
Yeah,
and it goes down.
Okay.
But yeah, if you need to bring in your Python libraries and all that can be managed within Dataiku.
Exactly, yes. And as a data scientist, I like independence and I like control, and just let me experiment with my 3 libraries and my packages, and let me have this kernel here, and then we have my code environment here where I have full control into what's supporting that use case.
Sure.
And then I am ready to operationalize and let's share this with the world.
Yeah.
But yeah, that independence is key. And you mentioned IDEs. And there is a lot of people that still loves the IDE UX. And if you like that, go for it. Yeah. So we sync that. And whatever you are doing that is going to be represented in the flow itself.
Okay. And so then that's kind of my next part of that. Is that through like a Git integration? Or do you have, say, a VS Code extension? Is it either both?
Either both. And that's depending, because a lot of people is already doing some CI/CD at some level, and Git is a big part of it. So we are not going to be disrupting the way that they're doing things. We're going to optimize where they're doing things. So we're going to pretty much understand that CI/CD and put Dataiku on top as that orchestration of those pieces, but for these people as well. And now we all have the visibility on the CI/CD plus the alerting piece, the drift governance, and the whole thing. So it's a more user-friendly CI/CD that smooths that framework for these teams to really maximize what they can do together.
But then, can someone write, say, a Jupyter notebook within like Dataiku notebook, but then like push that down to get from the platform too? Or
you can write you can bring a Jupyter notebook that you already have, or you can start and write your Jupyter notebook, and it's going to become an orange bubble, literally. So it becomes an artifact.
Yeah.
And the traceability and the interdependencies and all of that is embedded in the flow.
Okay.
So you don't have to sit down and think about documenting anything because it's doing it for you. And that's another aha moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we don't like to document things.
No, 100%. And again, yours platforms sound like this on steroids, but say we're using like DBT for our SQL transformations, but like again, you have that traceability between models and like and reusability, and then it does some auto documentation. And again, there does need to be some work to enrich that, but at least out of the box, you can see how these things put together and see like where this came from and what code generated what I'm looking at and everything. So, and I get just like onboarding people too has been huge. Yeah. Like when someone, and that's kind of what I will sell if we're interviewing like an analyst from another team. Like, dude, when you walk in day one, I'm going to give you access to this documentation. And then when you're using, this SQL, view at the end, like you can come to the documentation and see what transformations are happening there, what's happened downstream, and how it, it's being calculated. So it's just, as an onboarding thing too, just people can come in and be dangerous almost immediately. Exactly.
Innovation. That's where innovation happens.
Yeah.
Let people be dangerous. Let them experiment. Right. Let them try LLM versus another one. Let them create that interface. Let ask questions. Let empower them.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, it sounds like you're using it as a recruiting tool, but it's also a retention tool. If you give people better tools, they're not looking around to go elsewhere.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I've seen it on the other side where, I won't name names. Our ERP is not great, and like you lose accountants because they're like, I can't do this every month.
Yeah,
like bad tooling will ruin someone's life. And I think we had Mark Ebert from Dakota Analytics, and he had a great story about how some of the tools they built, actually helped an accountant that was spending nights closing the books till 1-2 a.m. and then she was actually able to get home 6-7 at night and see her kids. But she's like, you literally changed my life. I mean, but just by having better tools or better, So I mean, it's bigger than people realize.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It is. Well, and people don't, unless you've had to do it, you don't understand how hard it is to go into somebody else's code and figure out what the hell they were thinking or why they did this specific thing there and when and why or any of that stuff. And so just that traceability and auditability of things is so nice to have when you have it, because when you don't, it's a huge pain.
Yeah.
I personally started from zero a couple of times because of that.
Yeah.
It's like, okay,
that's easier. Most
way too messy.
Yeah.
I'm taking control of it. Yeah.
No, it's very true.
Okay.
Well, shit. I think that was quick.
Yeah, it was quick.
That was so
as I expected, but I want to kind of jump
wrap it up to the
lightning round or the
speed round. So we'll just pepper y'all with questions. Just give us short, fun answers back. But favorite cloud? GCP, Azure, or AWS?
Yeah, get me in trouble.
All right.
She has to answer
that was a loaded question, so I'll pivot. Let's go with favorite open source anything. It can be favorite or most useful or something that you use often. Or
well, right now I am loving Midjourney. So if you haven't tried it, go for it.
Yeah.
I love it. And it's empowering me as the human. So generative AI and generating these images from text and from image and prompting and seeing the power of the prompt and seeing that, generating an image out of it, I am fascinated by it.
It's crazy, the stuff that they're doing. And they're already doing stuff. I was telling Ding earlier today, they've already got stuff where it's combining, language processing. So it will translate the language, but then it will also generative fill the mouth so that the mouth matches the words that they're saying, not like all the movies that we grew up with where it's like they're talking and
it doesn't work. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
And it's really bad dubbing.
It's crazy the things that are going to come from that, both good and bad, unfortunately. But like the deep fake stuff is terrifying. But for the good, right? Like for us, we're looking at it as in like, how can we generate this podcast in 5 different languages so that more people can hear all the stuff that we're talking about, right? Like that's very valuable and very powerful and fascinating all at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that I have any strong opinions on this. I think, what's interesting from my standpoint, I'm sure I use open source things, but I've never coded anything in my life. And so what I think is interesting is the technologies that are open source, because they pull so much community adoption. And so there gets to be really powerful user bases that lead to roadmap of product and stuff like that. So Dataiku doesn't happen to be that, but I think some really interesting products have been launched over the last 10, 15 years that led with open source and community first.
Yeah, and that crowdsourcing helps improve the product faster. You get more eyes, hands on it. Yeah,
Mongo. I mean, there's so many that. Yeah.
If only our industry would learn that.
Well, they had an attempt with the OSDU. I mean, I think it's an attempt for that one.
It's still going on. Come on.
There have been a number of consortiums that I've watched spin up and slowly die over time. And I'm not saying that specifically about any one, but my problem with consortiums in our industry generally is that they end up getting led by, or a lot of the power comes from the big service companies or the other people that are involved that have obvious incentives for it to go one way or the other. And the whole point of open source is that you put those incentives aside and think about what is best for the mass and for the greater good and the community. And I don't know the solution to that, but I hope we figure it out sometime soon, because I mean, Wi-Fi, USB, Bluetooth, like there's so many everyday technologies that everyone uses that came from just that concept.
Who's your favorite social media follow?
Well, I actually have a few.
Okay.
And I will say that I like the AI and advanced analytics female community.
Okay.
So, of course, Kate, Kate. I follow her a lot. And Casey, as well, from Google.
Okay.
Well, ex-Google, because she quit.
Yeah. That's Casey Kozerov.
Yep.
Yeah. I have been in the market for a car for a long time until just recently. So I was watching car dealership guys podcasts and stuff, and
his stuff.
Was loving it. I mean, so I did purchase a car, so I'm not following it as close as I was, but was a fascinating run as he kind of like appeared from nowhere. And
on
launched.
Twitter. I mean, some really awesome information.
And then great interviews on his podcast.
I have not listened to the podcast.
It's great.
I follow his Twitter quite a bit.
Yeah.
And you did it at an interesting time too, with the car market and stuff.
It changed so much month to month that it was, it was fascinating to follow.
But it was really, there was something too where I feel like he kind of moved the market on Buicks. Like he mentioned something about how Buicks were like, they were selling really low, and then it was like the next month, like Buicks like had a
exactly.
The power of
the power of social media.
Power of content, man.
Yeah.
All right, we'll wrap it up. What's one piece of advice you'd give to someone coming into kind of the energy tech space?
Be very aware. Technology has come a long way, and this is the time to be as empowered as you can be and bring the differentiator as a human that you bring. So education is key. Understand what's there and maximize that opportunity. And I will say, if you haven't tried any of the generative AI bots and so on, you are late. So get in there and start questioning these things and start understanding what it brings for you and how you bring that special layer, which is the humanity on it.
Absolutely.
So what it means to hallucinate, how we're going to control that, how we're going to really connect the dots here towards this one goal that we are sharing in this very diverse group.
Yeah,
that's
100%.
The advice.
But it is going to enable people that didn't have access to that power before. I mean,
exactly.
It's already happening.
But they have to be willing to not be afraid of it and to
exactly.
and
embrace it.
Yes,
and practice it too, because the degree of output significantly changes based on your prompts with most of these.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you need to go write a paragraph every time you prompt the thing, but really does
how you
help.
ask the questions.
Absolutely.
Because we were talking about in the last one too, Ding, but like Andrew Ng or whatever, or I think, but he had a really good 1 hour course on prompt engineering, and you just learn like this is how you have to ask the questions so that because again you can, and they do a decent job if you ask it a decent question in your native language, but if you break it into these steps or tell it that you're this or really outline it, it takes it to a whole another level.
Act as, and your goal is to, are very, very important things to put in most prompts because they really help.
Think how you're going to be 10x more productive with the technology that you have in your hands today. That's where your mind has to be. Where is your side of it on how you're going to have your own wings?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So to that point, maybe a slightly different tack is the world will continue to consolidate for operators. I mean, that's been happening. It'll continue to happen. And there has to be an opportunity to differentiate yourself in those organizations as they combine, particularly if you're part of the group that's being acquired. And so what I've seen over and over again is the change agents who can demonstrate that they brought the business value are leaps and bounds ahead of their peers for promotions, for even making themselves compelling to other companies outside of that organization. Right. And so if you want to, it's not even necessarily about advancing your career, but if you want to demonstrate the value that you bring to the organization, the easiest way is to demonstrate your ability to be a change agent, because decisions at these organizations are becoming harder and harder.
Yeah.
And if you can navigate these organizations to make decisions and make impact, it is something that is clearly visible through your management line.
Yeah. No, that's good advice.
Again, I would go back to, but I mean, Ding had very similar, talking about how he navigated different companies. And oil and gas, you're going to have the ups and downs, but like, are you solving people's problems and like, are making things more efficient and better? Like, if you are, like, it gets noticed and you're going to stick around. Like,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Or you're going to make it through the layoff, right? Like, that's
right.
another big
there
one.
You go. And know how you're going to measure success somehow, right?
Yeah.
Let's align on that and let's target that.
Yeah. What does
variable.
success look like? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Where can people find y'all? And
yeah, I'm Nathan Semones on LinkedIn. I'm relatively active. I don't do any Twitter or anything else, but here in Houston, and make my way around to the oil and gas towns pretty frequently. So
same. Google my name, you'll find me.
Google me.
She's everywhere.
I love that.
Google me.
Thank y'all for coming on. We really appreciate it. This hour.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Love
you so much.
Thank you for having us.